Hello, everyone. I'm going to be talking about how to build a plagiarism detection service using TypeScript and the ChatGPT API. So you already know me. I'm Preston. I'm a senior software engineer at Mountain. I work in React, Node, and TypeScript. And then at night and weekends, I'm an instructor. I work on full stack web development, teaching all of those pieces of technology. Today, we're going to be talking about quite a few things, some of the things that I kind of expect you to know, but even if you don't know these things, it's not a big deal. A few things about React, a few things about Express and TypeScript, just the basics, using types and interfaces and bootstrapping an app, because all of these things are going to be pre-built for us in the demo. What we'll cover is the OpenAI API, intro to its capabilities, models, keys, tokens, calling that API from Express in an application, and handling that response when it comes back for the front end. Before I get started, though, newsflash, it's not called the ChatGPT API. It's the OpenAI API. I know, not a big deal, just nomenclature, but it's important to remember ChatGPT is just one of the OpenAI products. There are things like DALL-E and GitHub Copilot, and we are going to be calling the OpenAI API using ChatGPT, which is why we are calling it the ChatGPT API, because it's well known. It communicates what we wanted to talk about today, and we'll be using it, those models, in our API calls. What we are not building is a true plagiarism detector. I know, it's sad, but the reason why it's just way too complex to solve in 25 minutes. It requires an enormous database of existing works, which we don't have, and it requires models trained specifically to detect plagiarism. And quite frankly, it is something that is really quite challenged by modern day ChatGPT and LLMs, where they're creating these original works and they're fooling many of these plagiarism detectors. And what we're also not creating is a chatbot, because everybody is doing this, and you can use ChatGPT for this, right? Everybody's already doing this out there in these tutorials online. I wanted to show a different use case, a different way that we can use it in our application. So what we are building is a service that works well enough. It's something that detects plagiarism, it really does, and it shows how easy it is to implement with the OpenAI API. Of course, we are going to be using TypeScript and the OpenAI API, because this is a TypeScript conference. And we're going to be using React, Express, and Node. So how it is going to work, it's just your basic front-end application with a backend to it. So we're going to be gathering some text body input. We're going to be sending it to the backend, wrapping that text body into a context prompt, calling the OpenAI API, sending the entire text with the prompt, formatting the response from that API, and then displaying it to the user in a helpful view. Today, we're going to be talking about get into our demo. So take a look at this URL here. If you want to, go to my devrocket.io website, and you'll be able to find the plagiarism detection service blog post, where you'll be able to access that repo as well, and you'll be able to follow along. So without further ado, let's get into the demo. All right, so here we are with the plagiarism detection service, the Git repo for this talk. And you can go here and clone the repo yourself. Let's get started. We clone the repo and run npm install. I've already taken the liberty to do that in the effort of time. And then we can go to this platform.openai.com. If you need an account, create one. If you already have one, then you just log in. And then we want to go to view API keys. Here, you'll have any API keys that you've already set up, or if you don't have one, then you'll need to create one. Once you've created it, then this is a one-time view, so you need to copy that immediately. And then the next step that we need to do here is we need to add an env file, and we paste that key, OpenAI API key. We run start client and then start server. We have a client and a server running, and we have the service running here in the browser. Now, when we type in something, this is already set up and ready to go just as a shell of a front end and a shell of a back end. If we type in something, you can click submit, and we see not yet implemented. What's happening here is we go to the network tab, and if we say something again, we'll see that there is a request to the analysis endpoint of localhost 4000. Why is that? Let's take a look at the source code. So what we're doing on the front end here is we just have a basic app. It's a one component application in React, and we have a default response right here. That's what we're setting our state for the output in the beginning. And then when we click submit, handle submit, we are going to take the input and we're sending it in this handler, this get response handler. This goes to the API URL, which is defaults to 4000. You can set it to whatever you want in your environment variables. Then to the analysis endpoint, and we're sending over the query. So the query is the text that was entered in the input field. So that input is this piece of state. Then the output would then be the response from that API. And then that output goes here, and we set the output in our other piece of state. Great. So 2 pieces of state, pretty simple React application. And then, of course, we're handling the change and reset anytime our inputs change. Great. And then that output gets displayed right here in this verdict box. Why are we doing this? We're sending this to the backend. Why don't we just like send directly to the OpenAI API directly from the front end? Well, the reason why is because we don't want, when we compile our React application, even though it's compiled into this crazy looking gobbledygook, and maybe normally it's a little bit difficult to read, the thing is our API key would still be in that compiled application, and anybody that wanted to, it's a publicly available file, anybody could look at that API key and use our API key. If you leak your API key, or if your API key gets leaked, then your tokens would all get used up by whoever wanted to use them, and then you wouldn't be able to use your tokens anymore. And if you're paying for it, then you would actually end up racking up an enormous bill. So don't put it in directly into the front end. Don't make a request directly from the front end to the OpenAI API key or OpenAI API. You want to make a request to the back end, and in this way, we are storing our API key only in the server code. Okay, great. So now on the server, let's take a look at the server code. What's going on here? We've imported this .env, which is a great package that allows us to pull in the environment variables from the .env file. And we're importing Express and Zod and all these other things. And then we default our port to 4000. Otherwise, we can set it in our environment variables as well. This is a query interface that we've created just so that we can expect a text string query parameter from in our query string from the request, from the front end. And then we're extending the Express request interface to include that query. So we create our Express app here, and then we're going to use some helpful logging middleware and parsing middleware. CORS, a quick note about CORS. So in a real production application, we would probably want to limit our requests, or the allowed requests, to our front-end application, or maybe a couple of different front ends and maybe another service that would be hitting this server. But for the purposes of this demo, it's much simpler and easier to just use CORS and let it, it's publicly available, or anybody can make a request to this server. So that's what CORS is doing there. This is just a health check endpoint. And then right here, this is Zod. Zod is a great schema validation library that allows us to only allow certain types and inputs from our front end. And so anybody that's making a request, we're only allowing a text property in the query, and then it has to be a string and it cannot be empty, which is great. So that means that our text variable is going to be required. And so if we make a request to submit, if we say something, this is going to be a quote and it goes over. But if we make a request to this analysis endpoint with no text in the body, well, then it's going to error out on us. And then this is that schema validation middleware. So this is where we build the middleware, we use it in our analysis endpoint, and then this is where the route itself goes. This is the route handler. And our route handler is going to take the text from the rec.query, and we have to make sure that it actually is there, make sure that the prompt is not missing, and then also we will use this text soon enough in our call to the OpenAI API key, or OpenAI API. For now, though, it's just saying not yet implemented. This is just a string that we are sending back as the verdict. So we want to change that though, because we don't want to just say not yet implemented anytime somebody enters in some text. So let's actually build our API, the caller for our API. So before we get started, let's take a look at the documentation for the OpenAI API. So right here, we have the create completion endpoint. So we can post to this completions endpoint. We can actually just post directly to that endpoint. But the great thing about OpenAI is they have this package and their official NPM package, the OpenAI package, and it gives us these classes that we can use. So we use this configuration class constructor to construct a new configuration instance. And then that configuration instance is going to be passed to OpenAI API constructor, which gives us this object that allows us to call the method create completion. And all of this is just the default. We can just actually copy all this and use it directly in our application. And we don't want to use require. We want to say import from, great, import from OpenAI. And I don't have OpenAI installed in my app. So npm I OpenAI. Great. And then once that finishes installing, we will start the server again and go back to here. So we need to, so when we use this configuration here, it is passing in this process.environment.openai API key. We can instantiate all of this in the global scope of this module, but this await, obviously, we're not using top level await here. Let's create this as an async function. So let's say export const check for plagiarism, one of the most difficult words to spell. And this is going to take a text body, which is going to be a string. So we want to pass in a string into this function. It's going to return a promise, of course, because it's an async function. It's going to return a promise for a string or undefined. And then this is the body of that function. So let's move all of this inside our function. Great. So now we will get a response back, hopefully, from the API. And we're just going to use this default model. A quick note about models, though. So the models are the different ways that we can interact with the API. They have different trained models. And if we look at this models here, there are the different models here. So there's GPT-3, 3.5, 4, DALL-E. Depending on if you have plus or not, you might have access to one or the other, or not, or certain ones you don't have availability. They tell you their recommendations to use. Okay, so that's the model. The prompt is what it sounds like. It's the prompt. It's whatever we are sending in. We could just say prompt is going to be text body, but we don't really want to do that because we don't want to just send over directly what the user has sent in. So instead, we're going to take this out. We're going to send over the prompt, which will be, is going to be this wrapped text body. And oops, body, there we go. Text body. Now, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because we want to be able to send over a context. So I'm going to grab some text that I had pre-written, and let's take a look at this. So we are asking ChatGPT, like, hey, please check the following text for plagiarism. Here's the text. And then this is what the user has input into the text box in our front end. And then we're asking it to give us some detail on why you think it's plagiarized or not. If it's likely a quote, it should be categorized as plagiarized because, interestingly, this is something that happens with ChatGPT. If it's a quote, then it says, oh, well, that's not plagiarism, that's a quote. I'm like, well, we really want to know whether or not it's a work that has been written before by somebody else. So that's what we want it to be categorized as plagiarized. But we also want it to give us the explanation that it is the quote instead of just like some work that was categorized or plagiarized. Great. Another option here is this max tokens. What is this max tokens? We'll see in a bit, but max tokens means basically don't use any more than 7 tokens because otherwise my usage will go crazy, right? So max tokens, we're going to leave it at 7 for now. We'll edit it later. Temperature, that's another one. As we hover over this, higher values will make them output more random or less deterministic. Lower values, like 0 or 0.2, will make it more focused and deterministic. So we want to use 0 because we want this to always give us a very consistent response. We don't want, like, if this was a service that we were using to create or generate ideas or something like that, well, then we probably would want it to be more like 2 or 1 or something like that, so that it would be more random, so that it gives us lots and lots of ideas, different types of ideas. But we want it to be very deterministic. It gives us the same type of response for the same input. So we're going to leave the temperature at 0. Great. And this is still saying, hey, you're not returning anything. So let's take a look and return response. But if we try and return the response, TypeScript yells at us because the response is actually an object. The next property that we actually want is data. That's the property on the response object that we want to return. But no, we don't want to return that either because that's an object as well. There's this choices, which is a property on the data object, which is an array. And of course, we don't want to return an array. We want to return the first element of that array. And then we want to return the text from that choices element object. Great. So this is the format that we want to be returning from the OpenAI API response. Great. So this is the check for plagiarism function that we have created. And so now we're going to, instead of returning this not yet implemented, we're going to say check for plagiarism. And VS Code has helpfully already imported that for us right here. And so then we will pass in the text, which was the text that was input from the front end, passed in through the rect.query. Great. Once we've done that, we should, check for plagiarism is an async function. Not async. So we want to await its result. Great. So verdict will now be not a promise, but a string. And let's take a look here at our front end. So we should be able to say something, and then we click submit. And great, we get a response of this text is not plag. Plag is not a word, and this text is not plag is not very helpful. So what's happening? Well, this is where that max tokens comes in. So we've said max tokens 7. Now if we say 8, and we say the same thing, something. This text is not plagar, right? So we've increased our response by 2 characters. This is not going to go very fast. So let's just increase this to 1,000. And you'll probably want to increase it to something around here, maybe a few thousand sometimes, depending on what exactly you're doing with the OpenAI API. But if we say something again, then we will be able to get a response back. Not plagiarized. It's too short to be considered a quote. Right. So let's just check also if this is going to work on some other things. So let's say, once upon a midnight dreary, I woke with something in my head. If I click submit, then we see, this is likely a quote from Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. Therefore, it should be categorized as plagiarized. Great. So we're actually getting something that works here. So like we can enter in some text that's not plagiarized because it's just a single word. How can you say that that's plagiarized? But if we enter in text from a famous poem, it will actually tell us, yes, that is plagiarized. So this is, first of all, proof of concept. This is one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate today, is that with very little code, we can implement something that is quite impressive and amazing, that, as you all know, we can use ChatGPT in just its own interface. But in this case, we can integrate it into our application, and we can use it for something like detecting plagiarism, which is just mind-blowing, that we don't even have to build like we said before, this huge database of, pre-existing works and things like that. Is it perfect? No. And does it detect plagiarism by things like ChatGPT? Well, unfortunately, no, because ChatGPT is quite unique in the output that it will give us. And so that's not going to detect plagiarism for things like that. But for things like famous quotes or just pre-existing works out there that are widely known, it will actually be able to detect many things like that. So great. This is a proof of concept. But what if we wanted to make this a little bit more helpful for our users? Say we wanted to get this verdict, and then we wanted the verdict to just say plagiarized or not plagiarized, and then a little button that allows our user to click the button to see more detail so that we don't just spit out all of this output immediately. We want it to be more like a real service where we will say plagiarized or not plagiarized, and then click the detail if you wanted to see more detail. If we wanted to do something like that, we'll do something maybe a little bit unorthodox. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually change our prompt, and I'm going to grab a prompt that we had already written beforehand so that we can save on time. And our prompt is now going to say the same thing, except we're going to say give detail and respond with only valid JSON in this exact format. So we want it to respond with a verdict property and a detail property. And the verdict will always be either plagiarized or not plagiarized. As you can see here, plagiarized or not plagiarized. And the detail is going to give us the detail. The crazy thing is that because we have set the temperature to 0, ChatGPT will, as far as I have seen with my experience, always respond in this exact format. It won't send over weird and invalid response. Of course, it's just going to send over a string, so we actually have to parse that data into a real object. But it's absolutely incredible that we can do something like that. So let's just, first of all, see what happens when we integrate this into our application. And we just say something, and we click submit. Our verdict comes back as this object. It looks like JSON because it is. It's JSON that we're just plopping right into our application. This is not extremely helpful for the user, obviously. We're going to parse this, and we're going to use it on the React front end. So let's do that. Let's go to our React front end. And when we get our response back, we want to check if there is output. If there is no output, we say something went wrong. But if there is output, we want to open up this new try catch. I'm going to create a new try catch. Why are we doing this? Well, because in here, we're going to parse or attempt to parse the response JSON into an object. But sometimes, maybe, I haven't seen it yet, but maybe OpenAI API will respond with something that's not valid JSON. And if that happens, then the parsing will fail. So if the parsing fails, we just want it to wait. No, we don't care if there's an error. We don't care what the error is. We just want to make sure that there's no error. Okay, so we want to say set output to output. So what we're doing here is like, hey, if we haven't successfully parsed the JSON, we just want to set the output to what it actually is, right? And so then we'll move. So then that's basically what we're doing here, and then we're going to return. Great. In this try block, though, what we're going to do is we're going to parse. We're going to say JSON parse the output. Output. And we're going to save that in, or let's just say the verdict object is going to be the JSON parse, the result of JSON parse. So verdict object will be a valid JavaScript object. And then if we have verdict object dot verdict, then we want to set output to JSON dot verdict. Oops, not JSON, the verdict object dot verdict. Great. And then if we have verdict object dot details, details or detail. What did we say? Detail, singular. Detail, then set detail, which we are going to create this piece of state soon. Verdict object dot detail. So now we're going to have two different pieces of state. We want to return at the end so that it doesn't get down to this, the rest of this. And we can actually get rid of this set object or set output right down there. Awesome. So we need to create a couple new pieces of state. Detail, set detail. And this is going to be an empty string as well, because we will populate it with some details. And then here we want to create another piece of state, which is show detail. Set show detail. And this is going to be defaulted to false. It's a Boolean that we're defaulting to false. So there's a couple of pieces of state there. And so then we can actually set that output to the verdict object dot verdict and detail. Great. So let's try this one more time. Great. So we see now it's just not plagiarized. But if we parse that object and we console log it, verdict object, we should be able to see in our console, great, this verdict object comes back. It's a real object, and we're going to be able to use the detail very soon. So down here in our div where we show our verdict, we want to create a button. This button is going to show our the ability to enable the viewing of the detail. So if we have detail, button, and then we'll say show detail. So now if we say something, not plagiarized. Great. Let's actually move these together. So now we see show detail is right here in this box, but it's not doing anything yet. So let's say on click, we are going to set show detail to the opposite of whatever it is. So we're going to change it from true to false or from false to true. So let's, first of all, let's make sure that we're logging. Okay, once we show something, it shows detail is false. And now if we click show detail, now it shows as true. Great. We're almost there. We just now want to create another div that will hold the rest of our content. So div, we'll say h2 detail. And then we're just going to create a paragraph element that holds our detail in it. And once we do that, we see that the detail shows up. But we don't want to do this unless there already is a detail, right? So let's say show detail is true. Then we want to display this div. Perfect. Great. So now if we say something, we click submit, the show detail button comes back with the not plagiarized. And if we scroll down, let's actually open this up a little bit more. If we click show detail, great, detail shows up. This is not plagiarized because it is an incomplete sentence. Great. Well, at least it's saying it's not plagiarized. All right. So thank you all so much. Here's my contact info. If you want to get in touch, I am very active on LinkedIn, or the easiest way is to just find me by going to devrocket.io, which is that QR code right there. You can also check out my Git repos and things like that. Thank you so much again to Nick and Nadia. and the Geegle team, and of course, our moderator, Christian, for moderating at this wonderful session. Thank you all for watching.